Frank and I decided we weren't going to move to Minneapolis. And Frank's 13 years older than I am, so I was about 30 when all this was going down. So Frank was 43, a lot more maturity, and he'd also been through the MRL. He was the president of MRL and had been through kind of the creation of that company. So a lot more experienced business-wise and in all ways than I was. He had this idea of taking the packaging thing and founding a new company and running with it. And that was the start of Lansmont. Frank and I were the testing machine guys, and further division was Frank was mechanical and I was electrical electronics, and then Ed and Ken were the packaging guys.
Frank and Bill knew me back in Lansing and started talking with me about trying to form a company to do manufacture testing equipment and maybe do our own testing laboratory like we were doing at Michigan State at the time.
We actually wrote the business case for Lansmont in my apartment in East Lansing. And it was Ed Church, Bill Kipp, Frank Bresk, myself, and Ken Orisny. And we only could do it at night because we had real jobs during the day. And we had a typewriter, and we were typing this thing ourselves. And we did it in a week. We came up with a business plan and went out and talked to the consultants and I guess raised money, and they started Lansmont. And all those original guys were with Lansmont in the beginning. And so that's how I progressed with those guys, with Lansmont.
The origin of all of this, I mean, even Lansmont, but it goes back Lansmont to MTS Monterey to MRL. Before that, Firestone Engineering Laboratory, which is an interesting story. Leonard Firestone, son of the founder of Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. So Harvey was the dad. Back, I don't know, maybe turn of the 20th century or maybe even a little bit before. I mean, early days. Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. So that's Harvey. Leonard is the son. For some reason, unbeknownst to me or any of the research that I could do, he just became enamored with California. He loved California. Leonard died in 1996 in his home on Pebble Beach on the Monterey Peninsula in California. He not only had a number of business ventures, but was very philanthropic in California, a lot of charity work and stuff like that. So one of his wild hairs was he founded a little outfit called Firestone Engineering Laboratory in Monterey, California. I think that's where the shock and vibration mitigation components for Polaris missiles came from. I think that's what Firestone Engineering Laboratory did. And I remember the MRL guys telling me about a machine that they called Old Yeller. They built this machine down on the wharf, on one of the wharfs in Monterey. I think they had to be near salt water or something for these tests. I'm not sure because I wasn't there. But this was a Firestone Engineering Laboratory thing. So that's, shock and vibration mitigation and maybe producing the shock pulses. So that was Firestone Engineering Laboratory, and Frank Bresk and Bob Gray were both involved in that. Well, after a while, I think Daddy might have pulled the plug, or the Firestone company pulled the plug on Leonard, because it was like a lark. That was my understanding. He loved California and he wanted to do some stuff, and and Firestone went like, no, we're in the tire and rubber business. So this little engineering laboratory, which I think was just a handful of guys, really. Well, first Firestone wanted to sell it to Frank and Bob and whoever else was involved, but they didn't have any money. So they went looking for somebody to help them out. And I don't know how they came upon the connection, but it was to a company in Minneapolis or that area called Research Incorporated. And Research Incorporated, or RI, was kind of in the testing business. Well, they were, but their part of the testing business was thermal. So they made like little research ovens. For whatever reason, they bought out Firestone and created Monterey Research Laboratory with Frank Bresk as the president. So MRL started, and from their snubbers and motion arresters and stuff like that, got into shock machines. Pretty natural progression. And those guys were pretty good engineers. Well, it turned out that in the history of RI, they had a little subgroup. Now remember, they were making research ovens, but they had a little subgroup that was getting involved in the machines that actually pulled these things apart. And that little subgroup had split off to form MTS Corporation. Well, now RI realized that, gee, MRL's business was really closer to this other one than it was to them. So they kind of were in the background and arranged making the sale to MTS, which on paper made perfect sense, but as I told you, we weren't very happy with them, so that's what caused Lansmont. So, but the background with Firestone I always thought was sort of interesting. Yeah, and I mentioned that I thought Frank had been with Rockwell or some aerospace company. So the Firestone Engineering Laboratory hired him out of that company in Southern California and brought him up to Monterey. And as you know, once Frank got to Monterey, I mean, he put down roots that went to Magma, and he wasn't going to leave.
You got to remember, Monterey Research was into shock machines that could put certain pulses into products. At that point in time, it was in the aerospace and industry. Jim Goff at Michigan State somehow heard about this, and he got a hold of Frank Bresk and started a conversation about the whole thing. And they decided that packaging was an application that should be interested in damage boundary theory. Frank Bresk knew Dr. Bob Newton at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And Bob Newton came up with this concept of the damage boundary theory.
So we're working with Monterey Research, and Frank Bresk headed a lot of that. He got in contact with Robert Newton at the Naval Postgraduate School, and Dr. Newton came up with a procedure for determining fragility, and it's called damage boundary. That's how we got involved with Frank Bresk and Monterey Research.
There was that connection starting in about 1968 between MRL and Michigan State, which got us into packaging.
Frank and Bill rented an office in downtown Monterey where they did all the design work. In Lansing, we worked out of Michigan State.
And by the way, Frieda was our secretary at that point, Frank's wife. She should have been a founder. She was as very much a key player as the rest of us. You know, they were a great team. They were a husband and wife team that could really work together.
Frank was bound and determined to make this successful because, again, he was in Monterey. He wanted to stay in Monterey. He believed in the technology.
She held the office together and the administrative, you know, the things that have to be done, but you don't really consider to be part of the business.
Frank was a real promoter of the whole thing. It intrigued me. I'm a real believer in accepting change when it's right in front of you, that you can see that it's really the direction to go in.
I mean, Frank, again, Frank, a great mentor to me, and really the principal founder of Lansmont. Even though there were four of us, Frank was really, he was our daddy, and so I respect the guy a lot.